What would you do if your HOA president demanded the keys to your private gate and threatened your peace when you refused? The knock wasn't polite. It rattled the glass panel in the door, sharp and insistent, like someone trying to prove a point before even speaking. Andre Whitlow, coffee mug still in hand, frowned as he walked across the hardwood floor of his home in Stillwater, Minnesota. Saturday mornings were supposed to be quiet, a jog along the lakeside trail, maybe some coding work from his consulting projects later. Nothing dramatic. But as soon as he opened the door, drama arrived. "Mr. Whitlow," said the woman on the porch, her voice clipped, every word packed tight with authority. She was tall, lean, with a short blonde bob cut that looked freshly trimmed, as if appearances mattered as much as power. A badge-shaped HOA pin gleamed on her jacket. "I'm Joanne Prentice, president of the Lakeshore Association," she said, not waiting for him to ask. "We need a copy of your back gate key today." Andre blinked. "Excuse me?" "The gate on your property, the one that leads directly to the lake. You'll provide us a key so board members and any resident who needs quicker access can use it. It's only fair." Andre tilted his head. His gate. His deeded land. Fair? His coffee no longer tasted warm. "With all respect," Andre said slowly, "that gate is part of my yard. It's private, not community property." Joanna crossed her arms, lips curling slightly into a smirk. "That gate is the shortest route to the lake. You can't keep it locked up just because you feel like it. The community expects cooperation." He held her stare, calm, measured. "I bought this home because of the privacy." "That gate isn't part of your jurisdiction." Her smile thinned. "You really want to be the neighbor who refuses to share? That's the reputation you're going to start with here." Andre said nothing for a moment. He watched the breeze ripple across the water just beyond the fence line. He'd moved here for that view, for peace, for breathing room after years in crowded cities. And now, before he'd even settled in, someone was trying to stake a claim to his boundary. Finally, he answered, tone steady. "I won't be giving out my key." The porch went silent except for the soft sound of his dog shifting inside. Joanna's jaw worked, as if chewing back words she couldn't quite spit out. "You're making this difficult," she muttered. "The board won't be pleased." Think about that. And with that, she turned on her heel and strode down the path, heels snapping against the concrete like punctuation marks. Andre closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. He thought of his mother's old advice from years ago. Stand firm on what's yours, or people will decide for you. He didn't expect to be tested on that lesson so soon. Later that day, while trimming hedges near the back fence, Andre caught sight of neighbors pausing as they walked past. Some glanced toward his gate. Others gave him polite smiles but kept moving. It didn't take much imagination to know word was already spreading. That night, sitting on his deck with a beer in hand, he replayed the knock, her tone, the smirk, a stranger walking into his life and demanding the one piece of boundary he valued most. It didn't feel like the end of it. No, this was the beginning of something heavier, and he was right, because a week later, Joanna came back. But this time, she wasn't alone. Before we get to that moment, you need to understand why Andre chose this place in the first place, and why that gate meant more than just a fence with a lock. Andre hadn't moved to Stillwater by accident. After 2 decades of bouncing between San Francisco, Dallas, and Phoenix for work, he wanted something different. He was 44 now, and the grind of airports, deadlines, and late-night coding sessions had worn him down. A friend once told him, "You can make money anywhere, but peace, that's harder to find." That line stuck with him. When he first saw the house on Lake McCusick Drive, he felt that quiet click inside, the kind you don't question. The 2-story brick home had a small backyard that stretched down to the lake, separated from the water by a wrought iron gate. For Andre, it wasn't just a backyard. It was a barrier. From noise. From intrusion. From the chaos of the life he thought he'd left behind. The day he signed the papers, he stood at that gate with his hand on the cool iron handle, watching the water shimmer. "This," he whispered to himself, "is mine." But ownership, he would soon learn, didn't mean control, not in a neighborhood like this. The Lakeshore Association had rules for everything: grass length, mailbox color, even where trash cans could sit on pickup days. Andre skimmed the handbook when he moved in, sighed at the strictness, but told himself he could live with it. After all, he wasn't the type to start fights over cosmetic rules. He wanted his peace, His first week, neighbors trickled by with baked goods, polite smiles, and practiced small talk. A retired couple down the street, Ronald and Beverly Greer, brought over banana bread and asked if he liked to fish. A younger couple, Eli and Sandra Klein, mentioned that the HOA was a bit strict, but not so bad if you play along. Andre laughed. "Then I'm not worried," he said. He should have been, because what nobody mentioned was Joanna Prentice. She had been elected HOA president only a few months before Andre moved in. According to Sandra, Joanna had run on a platform of community unity and streamlining lake access. Most people shrugged when they voted for her. It seemed harmless. Who didn't want easier access to the lake? But Joanna didn't see it as harmless. To her, it was about control. And Andre's gate was now the obstacle standing in her way. One afternoon, as Andre unpacked boxes in his office, he overheard neighbors chatting on the sidewalk outside. He couldn't catch everything, but he heard his name, the word gate, and then soft laughter. When he stepped outside, the voices went quiet. Smiles spread too quickly, and the group dispersed. He leaned on the porch railing, staring at the lake. Gossip had already caught fire. The irony was that Andre didn't mind people using the lake. If neighbors asked politely, he probably would have let them pass through when he was around. But the demand, the idea that his privacy was subject to a committee vote, set his teeth on edge. Later that week, while grabbing coffee at a small cafe downtown, Andre ran into Ronald Greer. The older man hesitated, then leaned in. "Word of advice, son," Ronald said quietly. "Don't get on Joanna's bad side. She's got pull with the board. Folks around here, well, they don't like waves." Andre smiled faintly. "Ronald, I didn't move here to stir waves. But I didn't move here to get pushed around either." Ronald gave him a long look, then patted his shoulder. "Just be careful." Driving home, Andre replayed that warning. It wasn't the words that bothered him. It was the tone. Half concern, half resignation, as if Joanna had already won whatever battles came her way. That evening, Andre walked down to the gate again. He ran his fingers across the lock, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't about convenience. It wasn't about a shortcut. It was about the simple principle of boundaries. He whispered the same words he told himself the day he bought the place. "This is mine." But even as he said it, he knew someone else was already plotting how to take it away. The real test came when Joanna showed up again. This time, not just with words, but with a plan to pressure him harder. The second time Joanna appeared at Andre's door, the knock wasn't quite as harsh as before, but the intent behind it was the same. It carried weight. The kind of knock that expected obedience. Andre glanced at his watch. Early evening sun was sinking low, shadows stretching across the cul-de-sac. He had been in the middle of grilling chicken on the deck, finally starting to feel at home. When he opened the door, Joanna stood there again, this time with a folder tucked under her arm. Her face wore that same tight smile, one that pretended to be polite, but leaked irritation around the edges. "Mr. Whitlow," she said, her tone cool. "I thought you'd had time to reconsider." Andre didn't answer right away. He let the silence sit heavy, making it clear he hadn't forgotten. Finally, he gestured at the folder. "What's that?" "Documentation," Joanna said, holding it up slightly. "The HOA bylaws. They grant us authority to manage community access points to shared amenities." "Your gate qualifies," Andre raised an eyebrow. "That gate was on the property survey I signed at closing. It's mine. There's nothing in those papers that gives you rights to it." Joanna's eyes flickered with something sharp, but she didn't back down. Instead, she stepped forward, lowering her voice as though the neighbors might be listening. "Look," she said, "you're new here. You don't understand how things work yet. This community functions because people cooperate. If every homeowner started locking up paths and cutting off access, it would be chaos. The board expects you to contribute, not create barriers." Andre folded his arms. "And I expect my property rights to be respected. That gate isn't part of the association's amenities. It's part of my yard. You can look at the survey yourself." Her lips pressed thin. "Are you really going to make this about technicalities?" Andre laughed once, not unkindly. Property law isn't a technicality. Behind Joanna, a neighbor strolled by with a dog, slowing just slightly, pretending to check his phone while clearly listening. Andre caught the glance, the curiosity. Word was spreading, and Joanna knew it. Her shoulders straightened. "The board will discuss this." You may not like the outcome. Andre leaned against the doorframe, meeting her gaze without flinching. You can discuss whatever you want, but I won't hand over my key. For a moment, Joanna didn't move. The two of them stood there, a standoff framed by the evening light. Finally, she gave a curt nod, not of agreement, but of dismissal. You'll regret making this harder than it has to be, she muttered. Turning on her heel, Andre closed the door slowly, locking it with deliberate care. His dog padded over, tilting its head as if sensing the tension. Andre scratched behind its ears and whispered, "We're not the ones in the wrong." That night, Andre sat at his desk, flipping through the HOA handbook he'd tucked away in a drawer. He read every line about shared amenities, pathways, and common areas. His gate wasn't listed anywhere. The lake itself, yes, but not his private entrance. He felt a surge of frustration. How many other homeowners had given in to similar demands simply because someone said, "The board expects it"? 2 days later, while unloading groceries from his car, Andre caught sight of Joanna across the street. She was standing with Sandra Klein and another board member, Victor Braun, speaking in low voices. Sandra's eyes darted to him quickly, then away. Victor, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, didn't bother hiding his stare. Andre lifted his grocery bag higher and walked inside without acknowledgement, but the weight in his stomach told him this wasn't over. That evening, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. When he answered, Joanna's voice came through, brisk and businesslike. "This is your formal notice," she said. "The board will be reviewing your refusal to provide access. If you continue to resist, fines may be imposed." Andre felt his jaw clench. "Fines for what? For refusing to give you something you don't own? Go ahead. I'll see you in court if it comes to that." There was a pause, followed by a sharp exhale. "You're not being neighborly, Mr. Whitlow. Don't forget that people here talk." And with that, she hung up. Andre set the phone down slowly. He thought again of Ronald Greer's quiet warning at the cafe. He had brushed it off then, but now he understood. Joanna didn't just want a key. She wanted submission. And if he didn't give it, she would make his life uncomfortable. He sat back, staring at the dark lake through his window. For years, he had dreamed of a home where he could finally breathe. And now, within weeks, it felt like the air was already being squeezed out. But the real squeeze came next, when Joanna showed up again, this time with backup, determined to force Andre's hand. Saturday morning should have been peaceful. Andre had poured himself a mug of coffee and opened the sliding door to let in the crisp air rolling off Lake Makusik. He was halfway through reading an article on his tablet when the doorbell rang. The sound startled him, not because of its volume, but because he already knew who it might be. Sure enough, when he opened the door, there was Joanna again. But this time she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was Victor Braun, the HOA treasurer, carrying a clipboard like a prop to legitimize their presence. "Mr. Whitlow," Joanna began smoothly, "I wanted to give you another opportunity to resolve this matter without further friction." Andre leaned against the frame, not bothering to hide his irritation. "I told you already, Joanna, that gate is on my deed. It's private." Victor cleared his throat, stepping forward as though he were mediating. "We're not here to argue. We're here to remind you that cooperation is the backbone of a community. If everyone starts drawing hard lines, people suffer. Don't you think your neighbors deserve easier access to the lake?" Andre raised an eyebrow. "So you want me to just hand over my key because it's convenient for you? That's not how property rights work." Joanna's lips curved into a thin smile. "It's not about convenience. It's about harmony. Everyone else has agreed when adjustments were needed. You're the only one resisting." Andre folded his arms. "Maybe that's because I'm the only one who sees what you're trying to do. You can dress it up with words like harmony, but this is about control." Victor's jaw tightened. "You're misunderstanding. We're offering you a chance to avoid fines and bad blood. The board has authority to enforce penalties if you refuse to comply." Andre's voice sharpened. "Show me where in the bylaws it says you can force me to give up a private key. I've read it cover to cover. You don't have that power." For a moment, silence fell between them. Joanna's expression didn't crack, but her eyes flashed. "Do you want to make enemies here, Mr. Whitlow?" "Because you're on your way." Andre took a step forward, his voice low but steady. "I didn't move here to make enemies. I moved here for peace. But peace doesn't mean letting people trample my rights." Behind them, a screen door creaked across the street. Sandra Klein stood on her porch, pretending to water a potted plant while clearly listening. A jogger slowed down as he passed, glancing back at the standoff. Whispers would travel fast after this. Victor finally spoke, his tone clipped. "We'll make note of your continued refusal. Don't say we didn't warn you." Andre held their gaze until they turned and walked away, heels snapping against the pavement. He shut the door slowly, exhaling through his nose. His dog padded over, pressing against his leg as if to ground him. That afternoon, Andre noticed more subtle signs. A couple of neighbors who had previously waved now avoided eye contact. Children playing near the cul-de-sac suddenly darted away when their parents called them inside. Even Ronald Greer, the retired neighbor who had once offered banana bread, only gave a faint nod as he shuffled past with his wife. It wasn't overt hostility, it was the shift of atmosphere, like the air tightening. The message was clear. Joanna was pulling strings and the community was beginning to take sides. That night, Andre sat on his deck staring at the lake, replaying the conversation. He thought of his parents back in Arkansas, who had always drilled one lesson into him. Don't let people redefine your boundaries. If you give them an inch, they'll take your whole yard. He muttered aloud, "Not this yard. Not this time." But even as he spoke, he knew Joanna wasn't finished. People like her didn't stop at a simple no. She would escalate until she either got her way or got caught overreaching. Andre didn't have to wait long to see how far she was willing to push, because just days later she came back again. And this time, she brought more than one ally to his doorstep. By the middle of the week, Andre couldn't walk his dog without catching fragments of whispers. The conversation stopped just as quickly as they started, leaving him with the faint aftertaste of suspicion. He wasn't paranoid. He could feel it in the air. The neighborhood was watching, weighing him, waiting to see how he'd handle himself against Joanna Prentice. On Wednesday evening, he decided to test the waters. He walked down to the lake path, leash in hand, and paused when he saw Sandra Klein. She was crouched near her flower bed, tugging at weeds with nervous hands. Sandra had always been friendly enough, the type to wave quickly and move along. This time, though, she barely looked up. "Evening," Andre offered. Sandra hesitated, then replied, "Evening, Andre." Her tone was polite but tight, like she was measuring each word. Andre lingered, debating whether to ask. Finally, he said, "You've heard what Joanna's been saying, haven't you?" Sandra's hands stilled. She looked up at him, cheeks flushing. "People talk. You know how it is. Well, Joanna's very persuasive. She says the gate issue is about community spirit." Andre gave a short laugh. "Community spirit? Is that what she's calling trespassing now?" Sandra flinched slightly and returned to her weeds. "I'm not saying I agree. Just, people want peace. They don't want drama. And Joanna, she doesn't let things go." Her words confirmed what Andre already knew. Joanna wasn't just pushing him. She was bending the narrative so the entire neighborhood saw him as the obstacle. Later that night, while unloading groceries, Andre spotted Ronald and Beverly Greer strolling by. Ronald gave him a nod, but this time it carried no warmth. Andre stepped closer. "Ronald," he called out, "can I ask you something straight?" The older man shifted uncomfortably, his wife tugging his arm as if urging him not to linger. "Depends on the question. Do you think I'm wrong about this gate?" Ronald sighed, rubbing his temple. "Son, I don't think you're wrong, but I do think you're poking a hornet's nest. Joanna, she knows how to make life hard for people. Best thing you can do is keep your head down." Andre's jaw tightened. "Keeping my head down is what she wants. That's not happening." Beverly frowned, whispering something sharp in Ronald's ear. The couple excused themselves quickly, walking off under the glow of the streetlights. Andre stood there, bags in hand, feeling the weight of isolation. Each encounter confirmed the same truth. The neighborhood wasn't on his side. Not because they believed Joanna was right, but because they feared her more than they respected him. That fear showed itself the next afternoon. When Andre was out front trimming hedges, a small group of neighbors gathered across the street, Victor Braun among them, talking in hushed tones. Laughter erupted once, though it didn't sound friendly. A woman's voice carried faintly across the air. If he wanted to fit in, he'd just hand over the key. Andre tightened his grip on the clippers, forcing himself to keep working. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of reacting. That night, he called his sister back in Little Rock. He told her everything. The knock at the door, Joanna's folder, Victor's clipboard, the neighbors turning cold. "So basically, she said after a pause. This woman thinks she's the sheriff of Lake McCusick. Andre chuckled despite himself. Pretty much. You know what Mom would say? I know, Andre replied softly. Stand firm. Don't let them decide for you. The call steadied him for a while. He sat on the deck, staring at the water, letting the night sounds wash over him. But beneath the calm, he knew the storm hadn't even peaked yet, because whispers were one thing, cold shoulders were another. But when Joanna returned, she wouldn't come empty-handed. The escalation came faster than Andre imagined, because the very next weekend Joanna appeared at his door again, and this time, she didn't just bring Victor. She brought reinforcements. Saturday morning dawned clear, the kind of early summer day where the lake shimmered like glass, and families wheeled coolers down the street for picnics. Andre was in his garage, tightening bolts on his bike, when the sound of footsteps on his driveway made him pause. He looked up and saw her, Joanna Prentice, flanked this time by Victor Braun and another board member he hadn't yet met. The stranger was a stout man in his late 50s, his polo tucked neatly into pressed khakis. Joanna introduced him without being asked. This is Calvin Dorset, our HOA secretary. He's here to document today's conversation. Andre wiped his hands with a rag, every muscle in his shoulders tightening. Conversation or ambush? Joanna's smile widened, all teeth and no warmth. Don't be dramatic. We're here to resolve things in a civilized manner. Calvin opened a leather-bound notebook and clicked his pen. Please state for the record that you've refused to provide a copy of your gate key to the Lakeshore Association despite multiple requests. Andre let out a dry laugh. You're kidding me, right? You think scribbling in a notebook makes this official? That gate is mine. You don't own it, you don't control it. End of story. Victor stepped forward, clipboard in hand. This whole issue would disappear. Andre crossed his arms. Reasonable? You've come to my door 3 times, each time with more people, more pressure. And now you're dragging a secretary along like this is a trial. That's not reasonable, it's harassment. Joanna's tone sharpened. Careful with your words. We are the governing body of this community. That means we have the authority to act in the neighborhood's best interest. If you won't work with us, we will impose penalties. Andre's patience snapped. Show me where in the bylaws it says you can take my property rights. Show me one line that gives you access to my backyard gate. Calvin scribbled quickly, as if Andre's anger itself was evidence. Victor tried again, his voice smoother, practiced. Look, Andre, you're new. You don't understand the politics here. Things go easier when people cooperate. Refusing only makes enemies. Andre took a step forward, eyes locked on Victor. I'm not here to play politics. I bought this home because I wanted privacy. You're not entitled to it, and no amount of threats or notebooks will change that. For a moment, silence filled the garage. The sound of a lawnmower droned faintly down the street. A child laughed in the distance. But on Andre's driveway, the tension was thick. Then Joanna leaned closer, lowering her voice to a hiss only he could hear. You're going to regret this. Everyone here already sees you as the outsider. Keep pushing and you'll never belong. Andre didn't flinch. I didn't buy this house to belong to you. Her face hardened, the smirk finally slipping. She straightened, motioning to Calvin and Victor. Document his refusal again. We'll be taking this up formally. The trio turned and walked down the driveway, their voices low but urgent. Across the street, Sandra Klein peeked from her window blinds. Further down, Ronald and Beverly paused their morning stroll, pretending to tie a shoelace while keeping their eyes fixed on the scene. The whole neighborhood had witnessed the showdown without stepping forward. Andre stood there long after they had left, rag still clutched in his hand, knuckles white. He thought about his sister's words on the phone, about Ronald's warnings, about his mother's advice. He could almost hear her voice. Don't let them redefine your boundaries. He walked back into the garage, slammed the rag onto the workbench, and whispered to himself, enough. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He typed HOA Harassment Legal Rights Minnesota into the search bar. Article after article popped up, stories of homeowners fined for absurd reasons, boards overstepping their power, neighbors bullied into silence. His gut twisted. He wasn't the first to face this, and if he didn't act, he wouldn't be the last. Andre picked up his phone again, but this time he didn't search. He dialed the non-emergency number for the Stillwater Police Department. When the dispatcher answered, he said, "I need to report harassment by my homeowners association. They keep showing up on my property, demanding access to something they don't own." The dispatcher took down his information, promised to send an officer by if things escalated further. Andre hung up, exhaling slowly. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of control returning. Because Joanna might have the neighbors whispering, but he had the law, but the very next confrontation would prove just how far Joanna and her allies were willing to go. Because when Andre finally stood his ground with police on his side, the neighborhood would never see her the same way again. The call he'd made to the Stillwater Police Department lingered in Andre's mind for days. He told himself maybe Joanna would back off once she realized he wasn't afraid to push back. Maybe the threat of law enforcement would cool her ambition. But deep down, he knew better. People like her didn't retreat. They doubled down. Sure enough, the next Saturday morning brought the sound he'd begun to dread, the heavy, insistent pounding at his door. Andre closed his eyes, steadied his breath, and opened it. Joanna stood there once again. This time, she wasn't flanked by Victor and Calvin. She had brought both of them. And another face, Elaine Foster, one of the longest-serving board members, a woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper memory. It was a full delegation, their presence radiating authority they believed he couldn't challenge. Joanna wasted no time. "Mr. Whitlow, this is your final warning. If you don't hand over the key to your gate today, the board will begin imposing daily fines. We'll also be sending a notice of violation to your mortgage lender." Andre let out a sharp laugh. "You think you can threaten my mortgage over a gate you don't even own?" Elaine stepped forward, her voice cool and deliberate. "We've handled issues like this before. Trust me, it never ends well for the homeowner. Best to cooperate." Andre's hand tightened on the doorframe, his pulse pounding, but he forced his tone to stay steady. "Funny you should say that, because I already spoke to the police." The group exchanged glances. Joanna's smirk faltered, if only for a second. "The police?" Andre nodded. "Yes. They told me to call if this continued. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my property now, or I'm going to make that call." For a moment, no one moved. The standoff stretched long enough that Andre could hear the faint splash of a kayak out on the lake, the chatter of kids playing somewhere down the street. Then, as if on cue, Joanna laughed. "You think the police care about HOA business? Don't waste their time." Andre didn't bother answering. He pulled his phone from his pocket and began dialing, his thumb hovering just over the call button. That did it. Joanna's voice sharpened. "You wouldn't dare—" "Watch me," Andre said. He hit the button. Minutes later, the sound of tires crunching on the cul-de-sac gravel announced the arrival of a patrol car. Two officers stepped out, Officer Caleb Winton and Officer Cheryl Martinez. Both scanned the scene, their expressions unreadable but alert. Andre stepped forward. "Thanks for coming. I'm the homeowner. These individuals have been repeatedly showing up at my door, demanding a key to my private gate." Joanna jumped in quickly. "We're the HOA board. This man is obstructing community access to the lake. He refuses to comply with association rules." Officer Winton raised a hand. "Hold on, one at a time. Mr. Whitlow, is this gate on your property deed?" "Yes," Andre said firmly. "The survey clearly marks it as mine. It's not a common area." The officer turned to Joanna. "Ma'am, unless the gate is listed as part of shared amenities in the recorded HOA documents, you have no authority to demand access." Joanna's cheeks flushed, but she tried to hold her ground. "We're acting in the community's best interest. His refusal undermines harmony." Officer Martinez's voice cut through like steel. "Harmony isn't the law. Property lines are— If this gate is his, you can't force access. Continuing to pressure him could be considered harassment." Neighbors began to emerge from their houses, curiosity pulling them closer. Sandra Klein lingered near her driveway. Ronald and Beverly stopped mid-walk. Even kids with bikes circled at a distance. The cul-de-sac had turned into an audience. Victor adjusted his clipboard nervously. Calvin scribbled in his notebook, though his hand shook slightly. Elaine folded her arms, her confidence shrinking under the officer's calm authority. Joanna's voice rose, brittle and desperate. "So you're siding with him, against the entire board?" Officer Winton shook his head. "We're siding with the law. This man owns his property. You can't threaten his mortgage, you can't fine him for something outside your authority, and you definitely can't keep showing up here demanding keys. If this continues, we'll take further action." The silence that followed was deafening. Neighbors who had been skeptical now looked at Joanna differently. Andre stood taller, the knot in his chest loosening as the officer's words echoed through the street. Finally, Officer Martinez added, "I suggest you all leave his property now." Joanna's glare could have cut glass, but she turned on her heel, motioning for the others to follow. They retreated down the driveway, their authority crumbling in front of everyone. Andre exhaled, almost laughing at the absurdity of it all. He shook hands with both officers, thanking them before they left. When he turned back, neighbors were still watching. Some looked away quickly, but others, like Sandra, offered the faintest of smiles. For the first time since moving in, Andre felt like the tide might finally be shifting, but the fallout of that moment wouldn't stop at his driveway. The whispers, the judgment, and the cracks in Joanna's power were only just beginning. Word spread faster than Andre could have imagined. By Sunday afternoon, the confrontation had become the only topic in the cul-de-sac. Children repeated bits of it to their parents. Retirees retold it over iced tea on porches. Even joggers slowed down to glance at Andre's house, as if the sighting itself had absorbed the tension. The story grew with every retelling. Some said the officers had threatened to arrest Joanna. Others whispered that fines against Andre had been declared illegal. The truth didn't matter. The damage to Joanna's image had already been done. Andre saw it firsthand the following evening. He was unloading groceries when Sandra Klein crossed the street, clutching a stack of mail. Her steps were hesitant, like someone weighing whether to take a risk. "Hey, Andre," she said softly. He turned, surprised. Sandra had been polite before, but distant since Joanna started her campaign. "Hey, Sandra," she shifted her mail nervously. "I just wanted to say, I heard what happened and, well, good for you. Nobody's ever really stood up to Joanna like that." Andre leaned against his car, studying her face. "So people really do think she's overstepped?" Sandra gave a quick, almost guilty nod. "More than you know. But folks here, they don't want trouble. They stay quiet because it's easier." Andre thought about that after she walked away. Silence, he realized, was Joanna's real weapon. She thrived because people were too afraid of confrontation to push back. But once that silence cracked, everything else followed. The next day, Ronald and Beverly Greer approached him during their morning walk. Ronald lowered his voice as they neared his driveway. "I owe you an apology. I should have told you from the start, you're right. That gate is yours." "She had no business demanding it," Andre raised an eyebrow. "Then why didn't you say something before?" Beverly's face tightened. "Because Joanna knows how to make people miserable. She can fine you for leaving your trash cans out too long, cite you for weeds. It's easier to just avoid her." Andre folded his arms. "Easier for you, not for me." Ronald gave a weary nod. "Fair point. Still, people saw the police side with you. That matters. You might have given others courage." It wasn't courage that Joanna felt, though. It was fury. On Wednesday, Andre returned home from running errands to find a letter taped to his door. The HOA letterhead glared at him, bold and officious. Inside, Joanna had typed a formal notice. "The homeowner at 245 Lake McCusick Drive is hereby fined $100 per day, effective immediately, for failure to comply with HOA directives related to community access." Andre read it twice, then laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. She was doubling down, ignoring the police as though their words had been an inconvenience instead of a warning. That evening, he called his sister again. He read the letter aloud, his voice thick with disbelief. "She's really trying to fine you after the cops told her to stop?" his sister asked, incredulous. "Exactly," Andre muttered. "She thinks intimidation will wear me down." His sister didn't hesitate. "Then you've got to fight back. Don't let her bully you. Get a lawyer if you need to." Andre hung up with resolve hardening inside him. Joanna wasn't just overreaching. She was abusing power, and if no one else had drawn a line before, he would. That weekend, he attended his first HOA meeting. He hadn't planned to go, but curiosity pulled him in. Folding chairs lined the community center, neighbors murmured in clusters, and Joanna sat at the head of the table like a queen on a throne. When the meeting opened, Joanna cleared her throat. "Before we proceed, I want to address the issue of Mr. Whitlow's non-compliance." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Andre raised his hand. "Before you address me, maybe you should explain why the police had to tell you to stop harassing me." The room fell silent. All eyes swung toward Joanna. Her face stiffened, her lips twitching at the edges. "That is a gross mischaracterization," she said tightly. The officers misunderstood the context. Andre stood, his voice steady and loud enough for the room. "No, they didn't. They made it clear my gate is my property. You don't have authority, and every time you try to fine me for something outside your power, you're proving you don't care about the law." For the first time, whispers didn't back Joanna. They questioned her. Neighbors turned to each other, frowning, murmuring. Even Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Andre locked eyes with Joanna. "You don't get to bully me. Not anymore." Her knuckles whitened against the tabletop, but she didn't respond. For the first time since he'd moved in, Andre didn't feel alone. But the fallout of that meeting didn't just affect Andre. It shook the entire neighborhood, leaving people questioning whether Joanna's reign of control was coming to an end. By the time the next week rolled around, the neighborhood didn't look at Joanna the same way. She still walked with her usual brisk stride, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge, but now the greetings were quieter, shorter, sometimes skipped altogether. People who once nodded eagerly at her every word now kept their distance, as if the glow of her authority had dimmed. Andre noticed it most in the small things. Children who used to avoid his yard now played near his driveway, laughing freely. Sandra waved more openly when she passed by. Even Ronald stopped on his walk one evening, shaking his head with a chuckle. "You rattled her cage, son. She's not used to people standing up." Andre smiled faintly. About time someone did. Still, the fallout wasn't all in his favor. Joanna wasn't the type to surrender. If anything, the pushback seemed to harden her resolve. She began sending out weekly HOA newsletters that suddenly painted Andre as the villain. Phrases like "certain homeowners unwilling to cooperate" and "obstacles to community unity" crept into the text. Neighbors could read between the lines, but the tactic worked on some. A handful still gave Andre frosty stares, as if the conflict was his fault for not playing along. But cracks were showing in Joanna's camp. One evening, as Andre pulled into his driveway, Victor Braun approached him. The man looked tired, his shoulders slouched, his clipboard nowhere in sight. "Andre," Victor began, clearing his throat. "Off the record, I don't think this should have gone this far. Joanna, she doesn't know when to stop. I told her the police involvement was a bad look." Andre leaned against his car, arms crossed. "Then why are you still backing her?" Victor hesitated, then muttered, "Because she drags us down with her if we don't. But between you and me, she's losing ground." "People are tired of her games," Andre nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time someone else takes the reins." Victor's eyes flicked nervously toward Joanna's house down the street. He didn't answer, but Andre could tell the thought had crossed his mind, more than once. Meanwhile, whispers of a recall vote began circulating. Sandra mentioned it one afternoon while chatting by her mailbox. "It's just talk right now, but people are saying if Joanna keeps this up, the board could be forced to hold an election." Andre raised an eyebrow. "You really think they'd oust her?" Sandra shrugged. "Stranger things have happened. And after that police scene, she's not as untouchable as she thinks." The real shift came the following weekend. Andre was raking leaves in his yard when Elaine Foster, the sharp-tongued board member, walked up. He braced himself, expecting another confrontation. Instead, she sighed heavily and said, "Look, I don't like how this has gone. You're right about the gate. I checked the documents myself. It's yours." Andre blinked, caught off guard. "Then why keep pushing?" Elaine looked away, lowering her voice. "Because Joanna hates losing. And if she loses to you, it makes us all look weak. But I'm tired of being dragged into battles that make no sense." Andre studied her, weighing her words. For the first time, he saw more than just a loyal lieutenant. He saw cracks in Joanna's foundation. That night, as he sat on his deck overlooking the lake, Andre felt a shift inside himself. He had come here for peace, not conflict. But maybe peace wasn't always about silence. Maybe sometimes peace meant standing firm until people recognized the line between fairness and control. The neighborhood was beginning to recognize it. The murmurs were no longer just gossip. They were questions. Questions about Joanna's judgment, her authority, her future as president. And though Andre didn't seek power, he knew one thing. He had exposed her weakness. But the question remained, would Joanna step down quietly, or would she fight even harder to cling to her crumbling control? The meeting that would decide Joanna Prentice's fate took place on a humid Thursday evening in July at the Stillwater Community Center. Rows of metal folding chairs lined the hall, filled with residents who rarely showed up for anything HOA related, unless it was about landscaping or parking disputes. But tonight, nearly every seat was taken. The confrontation at Andre's driveway, the police intervention, and the letters Joanna had taped to his door had stirred something deeper than most expected. Andre arrived early, sitting quietly in the back row. He didn't want to be the center of attention, but he knew eyes would find him anyway. Sure enough, heads turned when he walked in. Some neighbors gave him small nods of encouragement. Others stared with unreadable expressions, still caught between loyalty to Joanna and curiosity about how this all might end. At the front, Joanna sat stiff-backed, gavel in hand, flanked by Victor Braun and Elaine Foster. Calvin Dorset shuffled papers beside them, though he avoided Andre's eyes completely. The meeting began with routine business, budget updates, landscaping schedules. But the tension was palpable. Everyone was waiting for the elephant in the room. Finally, Joanna cleared her throat. "Next item," she announced. "The matter of Mr. Whitlow's refusal to comply with directives concerning lake access." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Joanna's eyes swept over the crowd, but her usual commanding presence was faltering. Her words carried less weight than before, as if even she knew the ground beneath her had shifted. Andre raised his hand. "With respect, I think it's time the board stops twisting this issue. The police made it clear, my gate is my property. This association has no authority over it." Joanna's face tightened. The officers misunderstood. "They don't deal with HOA matters." "That's not what they said," Andre interrupted, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "They said harassment doesn't fall under HOA authority either, and that's exactly what's been happening. You've crossed the line." The room erupted in murmurs again, louder this time. Sandra Klein stood up from the third row. "He's right, Joanna. You've taken this too far. It's not about lake access anymore. It's about control," Ronald Greer chimed in from the back. "And intimidation. Everyone here has felt it at one point or another. Andre just happens to be the first one to push back." The floodgates opened. One by one, neighbors began speaking out, some cautious, others blunt, but the message was the same. Joanna had overstepped, and people were tired of living under her thumb. Even Elaine Foster, usually Joanna's sharpest defender, finally spoke up. "I reviewed the documents myself," Elaine admitted. "The gate is not community property. Andre is within his rights. I won't support penalizing him further." Gasps echoed across the room. Joanna's gavel came down hard against the table. "Order! This meeting will not dissolve into chaos." But the chaos had already begun. Only this time, it wasn't directed at Andre. It was directed at her. Victor shifted uncomfortably, then cleared his throat. "Maybe it's time we consider whether Joanna's leadership still represents the community's best interest." That single sentence changed everything. Neighbors erupted into agreement, voices rising. The call for a recall vote spread like fire through dry grass. Joanna's protests were drowned out by the very people she once commanded. By the end of the night, the board had no choice. A vote was scheduled 2 weeks later. Joanna was out. She resigned before the results were even tallied. Her grip on authority broken not by Andre's defiance alone, but by the courage his stand gave others. In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt different. Conversations were warmer. Children laughed freely without nervous glances. And for the first time, Andre could walk his dog without feeling eyes burning into his back. One evening, as he stood at his gate watching the lake shimmer, Sandra joined him. "You know," she said, "if you hadn't stood up, nothing would have changed. People needed to see it was possible." Andre smiled faintly. "I didn't move here to fight battles. But some battles come to you whether you want them or not." She nodded. "And you won." He thought about that word, won. It didn't feel like victory in the traditional sense. It felt more like balance restored. A reminder that boundaries mattered and that silence in the face of bullying only fed the bully. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Andre whispered the same words he had spoken the day he bought the house. "This is mine." Not just the gate, not just the yard, but his right to peace, his right to stand firm. And that was the real lesson, for himself, for his neighbors, for anyone watching. Boundaries protect more than land, They protect dignity. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Never let someone else define your limits. Respect yourself enough to say no and be strong enough to mean it. If you found value in this story, make sure to subscribe for more, because sometimes the most ordinary places hide the most extraordinary lessons.